we're gonna start off with, please ignore the glare on my glasses. There's no way around it. I'm just gonna nip this in the bud. I have to wear them. I am blind. I am so sorry if it annoys you, but I wanted to sit down today and film a wrap up for the week. Instead of doing a wrap up at the end of the month, I'm finding that some of the nuances with the books that I've either liked or disliked is lost to me by the end of the month, and it becomes sort of rambly when I try to do all of them at once, and I don't think it's enjoyable for me to film, and I don't think it's enjoyable for you guys to watch. So I am going to be doing weekly wrap-ups instead. They might take place on Instagram, which is linked down below if you guys want to follow over there. More than likely they'll be in video form on YouTube. But I am really excited to talk about the books that I have. If this is something you're interested in, instead of doing monthly wrap-ups, consider subscribing, or you can follow me over on Instagram. Like I said, I'll probably be doing something similar to this over there every week as well. But the first book that I want to talk about is one that I was so pumped when I heard about it. I recently hauled this. You guys may have seen it in my Barnes & Noble haul. I'll list it up above, but it is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. Grady writes some of my very favorite horror, and the reason for that is because a lot of the, I don't want to say like the darker books that I read or the horror books that I read, they always have an element of, I would say, feminism in them, or like sisterhood, which is really weird because Grady is obviously a male author, but I think he does it with such nuance. And come to find out, especially with this book, he also does it from like personal perspective, or like things that have happened in his life to inspire these stories. If you're not familiar with this, it follows our main character Fern, and she is from, I believe, Alabama, and she gets sent to a school for wayward girls, essentially, which is a school or a building home that the girls go to when they are with child. And if they are at this time frame unwed, or they are much younger, or you know, their families just don't want to deal with it, they are sent there. While Fern is there, she meets three girls, Zinnia, Holly, and Rose, and they form kind of this friendship, which is really, like, to read it was really hard to read because the girls aren't allowed to say like where they're from, their real names. They're all given new names when they do come to the home, and they're not allowed to really talk about any of their likes and dislikes. So as you're reading the story, you get to hear them sort of talk about like the little things that they are able to, and even from that they develop these really strong bonds. The kicker with this story is they find a book, or are given a book by what you later find out is a witch, and within that book they are able to perform spells. But as with any good Grady Hendrix book, everything that you do has a reaction. Like, there is always a consequence to everything that you do. And this story, you guys, was so hard to read at times. I will say, trigger warning for like graphic birth and, you know, just the normal like blood and things like that. I wouldn't say this is what I would consider like a slasher horror kind of thing, but more along the lines of the horror that just makes you deeply uncomfortable. Like, I don't want to say psychological either, but there's just something unsettling about the characters and the stories that Grady writes, and this is definitely one of those. But I absolutely loved it. I would put it at the top of my list for horrors written by Grady, as well as he had multiple family members who went through something like this. So he does speak from that perspective of, you know, hearing their stories, and, you know, just how it was like such a dirty little secret, and it's so, it's reverberated through this entire story. And another thing that really stuck with me about this is just the loss of power for the main characters. Like, we're talking about very young girls. One of them is incredibly young, and it talks about, you know, like losing their choice and their ability to make decisions, whether that's keeping their baby, whether that's giving their baby up for adoption, like going to the home at all, like just simple decisions, like even the food that they eat throughout the story, they lose all of that. So it was really poignant and really heartbreaking to read, but definitely one of the better Grady Hendrix books that I've read, and one that will stick with me for a really, really long time as well. The next book I have, I didn't know necessarily what this was about, but I'd seen it around and was like, you know, I'll pick it up. Like, I got it for my birthday haul, but it's The Foxglove King by Hannah Witten. So this follows our main character, Lore, and you find out very, very quickly that Lore is essentially a necromancer. So this was, like I said, not the book that I was expecting, but one that I still ended up really enjoying. I think I would give this like a 3.5 to a 4 on like the enjoyment scale. I don't rate on stars anymore. I am purely back to reading for enjoyment, and this is definitely one that I did enjoy, but not the book that I was expecting. So essentially, Lore is conscripted by the king to join I can't remember what they're called, but there's like a religious organization within the castle that basically works with death itself. And that's what Lore can do. Lore can see death. She can pull death from people. She can bring people back from death. If she can, you know, like raise the dead. And I really liked that. The other thing about this is there is a little bit of a love story that's happening at the same time. It's definitely a, you know, like a love triangle. Can you guys hear my dog snoring right now? I'm so sorry. Nova, my love, no snoring, girl. She is out like a light. Sorry about that. So what I really liked about this book, or the things that I really liked about this book, I really like Lore as a character. I think at times she was a bit daft. Like there were some things that were just happening that I was just like, ma'am. And I did not like the love triangle aspect of this. So basically the main story is that Lore is conscripted to work for the king because he is attempting to prove that his son is betraying the kingdom. There are whole towns that are being wiped out overnight. No one's able to figure out what's going on. And essentially they hire Lore because they want her to bring them back from the dead so they can question them about what killed them. Now, when I say cities are being wiped out, I mean entire cities are being wiped out. Everyone is dead. And no one can figure out, there's no blood, there's no violence, there's no magic that they can sense, no poison, nothing like that. And they have no idea what's happening. So the king says, hey, like my son is clearly causing this. I need you to follow him around. And at the same time, I'm going to have you resurrect people so that we can ask them what has caused this. There is a group of, I don't want to say like, they kind of remind me of clergymen that also work for the king. And what they do, mortem is what she can sense. Like I said, she can see it. She can, there's like threads of it, and they can do it too, to an extent, but to be given those powers, they have to have been either really close to death or have died. And then they can see death and can kind of control it, not to the same extent that Lore can. So when she takes on this role to, you know, follow around the soon-to-be king, the prince, she is working with one of those gentlemen. So the only thing I didn't really like about the book is a very awkward love triangle between the three of them. I didn't enjoy that. There is a lot of like pining from both sides, but the prince isn't really interested, but Laura doesn't really know what she wants, and everything's kind of, you know, up in the air, and, you know, she's having trouble choosing, even though the prince has not made it apparent that he wants to be with her, but her and the prince are kind of called together, and you sort of find out why. I really did like this book though. Like I said, I would give it like a 3.5 to a 4 for enjoyment. I just thought it was a really interesting story. So definitely one that I want to continue. I've actually already picked up the second one, so really excited to read that one. But it was just fun, and it was different. It's like a fantasy kind of romance, but not too like actiony at the same time. Like I just think that sometimes I just need like a different kind of fantasy that isn't going to take like a whole lot of brain power, but still has a good story. And I definitely think that that is what this book gave me. If you haven't read it, I would recommend it. If you do like fantasy, I will say it's a little bit slower on the startup. Like it took a second for it to like get to a point where I was like, yeah, I'm so ready to keep reading this. And the last book that I read, I don't actually still have a copy of, because this is the one that I didn't absolutely love for the month. So I'm just pulling up Storygraph here so that I can talk about it, which reminds me, if you guys aren't following me on Storygraph, you should, because I deleted Goodreads years and years and years ago. I don't do Kindle Unlimited anymore. My Kindle is years old. I won't be buying a new one. I'll probably switch to Kobo. I have just said fuck you to Amazon. But the book that I read is When the Sky Fell on Splendor. This is actually written by Emily Henry. I'll put a photo here for y'all. But Emily Henry, if you know, is like a romance author. Like that's what she writes about. But she wrote a book. This was, I got this from Book of the Month like years and years and years ago, probably like 5-6 years ago, before I'd even known her as a romance author. So this is very, very different. This follows our main character, Franny, and 4 of her friends. And essentially there is an accident in Splendor, Ohio, which I live in Ohio. That's not a real place. But there's an accident years ago that kind of brings her and her friend group together, because there is a plant that is there that there's like a huge accident that happens, and a lot of their friends and family die in that accident. So when they're in the hospital, they start kind of connecting, and then through other ways, her and her friends sort of connect. So it's her brother, and 3 other friends. And one night they have a group that they kind of film. They film like little funny YouTube things, like they do mockumentaries essentially, and they're out filming it one night and they start seeing that all of the stars are falling, and they're like, oh, you know, it's a meteor shower, like nothing big. And then they see one star that falls just very straight line, lands at this plant that is the one that all the accidents happened at. And they see this thing land and they're like, what the hell is that? So they are there with her dog, and the dog takes off and everybody follows the dog, and they jump this fence, and they're not supposed to be there, and you know, classic not supposed to be there. The closer they get, they see that there's a disc that has landed on the other side of the fence where they're at now. And her brother goes up and is like, what's going on? And he goes to touch it, and there's a huge crack that happens at the same time. Well, Franny's touching him, and their friends are kind of all gathered around them because obviously they don't want them touching the disc. And they wake up 6 hours later with no memory of what happened. So you start to sort of realize as the story goes on that there is like a, I don't want to like give too much away, but essentially Franny and the other people in the group start to develop what you would consider superpowers. Now, this book definitely gives me like knockoff Stranger Things kind of vibes, and I can't remember which one came out first, to be honest, but it's definitely very dark, very like we have a young group of kids that have like these superpowers and they're trying to figure out where they come from. This is part alien novel, and then part like, it's definitely more YA, kind of science fiction, I guess is what I would say. But you spend a lot of the book trying to figure out like if people are who they say they are, what these powers really mean. There's a gentleman in the town who they believe committed or planned you know, the accident that happened, and he plays a role in the story. And there's another gentleman who reaches out to Franny and is like, hey, I've been where you are. This is an alien that has infected you. Like, it's just, it was really, like at first I was so bored. Like, I had to be completely honest. I would say by like 50% of the book, I was like, man, I could DNF this and probably still be okay with like not knowing the ending. But once like 50-60% happened, I was invested. I actually did this on an audiobook, even though I owned the physical copy, and I would not recommend. I think both the narrator, the fact there were so many characters and they were all done by the same woman, and all of the men in this book sounded so awful. But the audiobook was a really good way for me to get more of the story in instead of like physically reading the book, because I was reading so many other physical books. But I would not go that route if you are interested in reading this. I would say I would give this like a 2.5, 2.75 on the enjoyment scale, only because the second half of the book and definitely the end of the book really had me like gripped. Like, I wanted to know what was going to happen. But nothing is what it seems. Like, this is one of those books that even though Rocco hasn't read it, I was like, let me tell you about the book that I'm reading. Like, I need to give you my opinion on this book. So not horrible, but it just took a really long time for it to be super enjoyable. So I don't know if I'd recommend it. If you like, Emily Henry's style still comes through. Like, you can definitely hear like her characters, but it just seemed like a very base version, I think, of what she normally does. So not the most enjoyable book I read, and very, very slow, but once you get into it, it was really enjoyable. But those are the 3 books, I'm not going to keep rambling, that I read in the last week. Let me know if you've read any of these. I have blown through quite a few already since then, so I'm going to have even more to talk about next week. I've just been on a reading roll. I am here for it. I'm already at 28 books for the year, so just loving it. And like I said, I figured this would be a better way to talk about those books. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. I love you so much, and I will see you next week in a video. But if you want to see more of me before then, like I said, my Instagram will be linked down below. Bye!